Okay. Okay. So today, the welt pockets are really the brain surgery of this particular coat. And so today's portion of the program is preparing the welt and pocket unit to install into the coat. Next week is going to be installing everything into the coat. Now, if you remember back from the initial video of the coat, if you remember, panning over the area of the coat where the pockets are, how beautifully that all matched, because it is a little tiny bit of a check in the fabric that we're working in. You're going to be learning that part of it is in the setup this week, and then part of it is in the installation next week. So that's where we're going with this. So I guess before I start the program, any questions, any comments, anything you need from me?
Yeah, I have another question.
Yeah, please.
Last week when you were doing the latch,
Yes.
and we talked about the pocket in it, the buttonhole in it.
Yes.
So you should do that ahead of time.
If you're going to be making a bound buttonhole, you want to make the bound buttonhole before you construct the cuff latch. And so I had a question, on that from several people. Now, the old school way of finishing the back of that buttonhole would be just cut a slash and whip stitch it to the back of the buttonhole. You could also, if you wanted to, work a machine buttonhole on the lining and then sew that machine buttonhole to the back of the bound buttonhole on the face. That is a legitimate finish. I've seen that before. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So,
Anna?
Oh yes, go ahead.
Yes, I have a question. I believe that next week we don't have class because
that's correct. Thank you for reminding me that. Yes, my friend Stuart's memorial is next Saturday, and so what we're going to do is add that extra, day kind of at the end. So we're going to get the full eight classes. But yes, thank you for reminding me that next week we won't be having class. I'll be crying my eyes out. And I know this sounds crazy, but he had, he was very big on having like clean white starch handkerchiefs. That was his thing. And he has had a stack of them. And so I'm just taking them to this event because I figured there are going to be plenty of people who are going to be needing one, including myself. So, but yeah, so that's next Saturday. So we will have this, and it'll give you a week to get caught up. So if other things have been in your path, you can have a week to get caught up. Okay. So other questions?
Just a comment before we start, Kenneth. Yes. I just wanted to let everybody know that I did take your advice, and I went to M&K or MK Cutting, and they block fused the fabric. So if anybody is in New York, they do a fantastic job. And I dropped the fabric off at 9 in the morning, and it was ready before noon. So.
Yeah, it's so convenient. I'm working on this Mother of the Bride dress, and I'm cheating with the dress itself because it has chiffon overlay, and it's a 4-ply silk crepe. Yeah, you take it in, you say, I want, with this, I said, I want a fusible tricot, lightweight fusible tricot. And, they fused it, rolled it back up on the bolt, no muss, no fuss. So yeah, if you're in the neighborhood or anywhere where you can get to them, if you need anything block fused, it's quite a nice service to have.
Are you fusing the tricot to the chiffon or?
No, to the crepe.
So the crepe, so I was imagining a chiffon jacket, and I would tear the heck out of that.
Well, you see, there's the dress,
crepe.
And the dress is, it's like a lace with a kind of a draped chiffon and chiffon skirt, sleeveless, and then there's the bracelet length jacket that is the same length as the dress, and that's all chiffon. So this overskirt is going to be chiffon. There's a drape in the Empire line, that's the chiffon. The top part is lace, which is, as we speak, being dyed to match. So it's,
do you underline the chiffon with like how we did the lace jacket, or no?
No, the chiffon is just one layer, just a one layer. And so for me, that fills me with terror, even though it is a very simple, straightforward, like shoulder seams, side seams, sew the armhole seam, one seam. because God, I loathe working with this fabric. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. If you want to know how to work with these fabrics, that is a Linda Maynard specialty. I have seen her make a bias binding in charmeuse on chiffon that is absolutely flawless. So, you know, what she would say to me, which she's done in the past when I've had to work with these fabrics, just man up and do it. You know what to do. So I'm manning up and doing it. So that's what I'm working on. Okay, so if there are no more questions, let us begin the program. And as always, you know, ask questions, don't be shy. And here we go. These are the welts for the welt pocket. And the instructions that follow will show us how to make this. But let me show you a little something here. This is the face, but when you turn it over, if you really look carefully, see here, and it's hidden by the fabric, but you can see, there it is. There is a seam here. So there's not a seam on this end and not a seam on this end. The beauty of this particular construction is that you have 3 folded edges and no additional thickness here and here. To achieve this, it first starts with the pattern. And that's what we'll start with, drafting the pattern for the welt. Before we make the welt pocket, though, we need to make the pattern. I like to show this because it's useful to know how to make the pattern for any shape of welt. This is, I think it's called a quadrilateral or a quadrangle. It's 4-sided. This is the welt guide that we're going to be using. You can see this points up. This line is what will sew the welt into the body of the garment. And you can see there's the grain line. So what I have done is I have copied this on fresh paper. So I have the up direction, I have the grain line here. And so now we're going to make the pattern. A little explanation. When you have one of these patterns, generally there's a fold here and then a seam on this end and on this end. That's all well and good, but I think that it's a little too thick on the ends. So I'm going to show you how to pivot these end seams to the back. As you can see, I have copied this on fresh paper, and let me just label this. This is the face or the front. The other side is going to be the back. So our first step is fold paper on this fold line. So that's a fold here. And then we want to cut this out. And with some tape, these ends closed. One end tape closed. The other end tape closed. Get rid of that there. Okay. So this is the front. This would be the back. So what we want to do is we're going to pivot these ends. We're going to create a seam here and here. This is a little handbag. The easiest way to figure out how to place your seam, you're just going to fold. That fold will be a line. And this fold will be when you're making this pattern, the thing to know is that the lines start at the cut edge and go towards the corners. So now from here, I'm just going to label, this is for navigation. These two are points A, that's going to be B at the corner, and then C and D. So these I will use to navigate through the construction. At this point, you want to cut one layer. I know it seems obvious, but I've had people cut both. So we cut C to D and from A to B. Lay this out flat here is, that's what the pattern looks like. And just to have the lines, I'm going to draw a line there, a line here. So there we are. That is the pattern. We're not going to add seam allowances. We're going to do that in the construction of the garment. So here's the pattern. Next, cutting out the materials. So I'm going to stop here and see if this makes sense to everybody.
It's brilliant.
Well, you know,
It's very neat.
you know, we're just pivoting this to a miter. That's, you know, basically what we're doing. And not having a fold on either, or not having a seam on either end is going to make this welt nice and flat when you install it into the garment. And so, you know, my students at FIT always want to add seam allowances to everything. But what this represents is all the stitching lines, because the next step, what you're going to see in a moment, is we're going to copy this off onto silk organza. So that is our next step. First, we mark the silk organza. Now notice I'm laying the organza on top of the pattern. It's much easier than pin it a few places. Now, the fold should be parallel with either the lengthwise grain or the crosswise grain. The silk organza doesn't have to be on the same grain as the main body. The main body grain line, that's really just for the fashion fabric itself, not for the understructure. So now what I will do, and this is one of those times you can use a Sharpie, it's allowed. Some people clutch their pearls and see that I'm using a Sharpie, but it's considered legitimate. We want to transfer all of this information onto the organza. So here I have all of the information transferred to the organza. What I will do next off camera is to flip the pattern over to get the piece for the opposite side. And I will bring that back once I'm finished. So here I have both pocket pieces. We have mirror images here. So then the next step is going to be taking the pattern piece, holding it closed, because we're going to be using this to cut the interface. There we go. Better. This we'll use to cut our canvas. So I will go get some canvas and bring it back here. Here is a scrap of our canvas, and I'm going to put this long line, this is the fold line, on the lengthwise grain. And this is cut double, so you can cut both at the same time. Really? There we are. And finally, what I like to do, since we're going to have a fold on this edge, and this edge, I want to shave off 1/8 of an inch. On that fold there, along the top edge. You want this canvas to be slightly smaller than the welt so that it doesn't create a bind inside of the welt at the end. Now we have 2 mirror images. Next, we apply this to the organza. I worked ahead and pinned one of the pieces of canvas down. So really what you're doing here is you want to line the lower edge up with this lower edge here. And you want to make it so that this is centered all the way around. You'll see about 1/8 of an inch outside these cut edges of the canvas, and that's as it should be. So what I will do is I will go over to the machine and sew through the canvas and the organza with a serpentine stitch. You could use a zigzag stitch, but we're just going to sew this together. No mystery there. So I will bring back the finished product. So here, this is what we have. This is just a serpentine stitch. You could use a zigzag, or if you don't have a zigzag stitch, you could just sew with 2 rows of straight stitching. This is just holding the canvas to the organza. This will be the side that goes against the face fabric, but we'll cover that in a moment. Now that we have the 2 welt unit support structures, next we go to the coat itself. So I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions.
So we're drafting the organza pattern ourselves, right?
Yes. Yes, in the pattern, there's what I call the welt guide. And so that is what you're going to be using to create this particular pattern. And I just think it's useful to know how to get this particular pattern shape for any shape that has 4 sides to it or more. If you have something that's curved, you're going to have to sew 2 pieces together with the seam around it. But for anything with angles, this is the way to go. So that's why I don't have a specific pattern included in the pattern pieces for you. Okay. So other questions? Okay, so now like I said, we're going to the garment itself because we need to do some very accurate marking onto this from the fabric on the garment.
I have another question, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
If for some reason you couldn't get organza? I have organza. I'm just thinking, you know, like if you couldn't, are there other alternatives you could use?
Anything sheer,
Okay.
you know, because see, the object here is you kind of sort of want to see through it. You could, you know, if you can't even get silk organza, there's cotton batiste. I think there's cotton organdy. You know, anything thin and sheer will work. Okay.
Thank you.
So before I begin, what I like to do is to use a stay tape. You could use seams grate, you could use any other kind of fusible stay tape to stay the armhole, the neck, and the front edge of the jacket front. You can see here we have our tailor tacks, we have our center fronts. So this is preparation that you want to do before you address the working with the fronts, so that you don't end up distorting anything. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this away and move this in. So what I've done here to kind of explain, you can see that this fabric has sort of a subtle vertical stripe. I'll zoom in just for a moment. The horizontal stripe isn't that pronounced. It's really the vertical that I'm concerned about. So what I want to do when I install the welt, I want the grain of the welt to match the grain of the fabric. So what I've done here, this is just a thread tracing up one of the stripes so I can see what I'm doing. And I also made a line of thread between this tailor tack and this tailor tack. Now in my example, maybe in yours too, the pocket welt ends up a little shorter than this. So you align it with the top tailor tack. Now here we are. So here is this. Now the canvas is underneath, because the face fabric is going to be on top. But what I want to do is I want to see where the placement of that line is. So if you're wanting to match a pattern or a stripe, this is really the way to do it. And that's one of the advantages of using the organza. You can draw the stripe on the organza so that when you lay it out onto the fabric, you can get a good match. So what I'm going to do here we are. That is going to be the line for the stripe. We'll do this on the other side as well, but I'm going to work with this half for this particular example. So once we have this and we have the other one marked, we're going to go to the fabric to get the fabric onto the welts.
Kenneth, can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Let's say, for an example, you're working with a patterned fabric that is rather ornate,
Yes.
like would I be advised to maybe do the marking on the organza before I apply the you know, like the tracing of the motifs onto the organza before I apply the canvas to it? Would that be
It's a little more stable when you have the canvas applied.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you know what you can do is you can look, you know, for the motif, because I saw your fabric, so you know it has a lot of kind of very curvilinear motifs. I would still have the canvas on the organza before I do the marking, because there's enough, you know, if you give yourself a fairly big seam allowance around everything, you'll be able to see enough of the pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're worried about, you know, it may not read through the organza, what I would do is just do a little thread tracing of the motifs and then mark the motifs onto your silk organza. Then you can take the thread tracing out later. But I would have the canvas onto the organza before I go to this step. I find it's a little more stable.
Thank you.
Okay, so are there other questions? Okay, well, back to the story here. So to refresh, this line here equals this line here. So now what we want to do, put this aside, I have another piece of fabric, and we want to pick out a line on this pin right there. So you can see there is a line going up. So to begin, I'm going to anchor the thread here. So then the object here is long stitches underneath, short stitches on top, because we want this, we want to see this grain line from the back. Now I realize I'm perhaps stating the obvious here. If you can see the pattern of the fabric on the reverse, you don't necessarily have to do this particular step, but since I block fused it, then I realized that I had to make this particular mark on the back of the fabric. So that's so also, Anne, kind of to your question, what you probably will want to do when you're matching the organza onto everything onto the fabric that's going to cover the welt is you might want to baste through the layers to kind of mark out your floral pattern on so you can see it on the back of the work. Or you could even use a tracing wheel and carbon to get that mark onto the back so you can match it. Did that make sense?
Yes, it did.
Yes,
Thank
it did. Thanks. Okay, good. Because again, we want the grain line of the welt on the face fabric to match the fronts. So short stitch here, show you what it produces here. It produces a longer stitch on the back that we can see. So I will go off camera and finish this and bring it back and show you the result. So here you can see I have a lengthwise grain and a crosswise grain marked because it does have a subtle little bit of crosswise grain. What I've done here on the organza, I compared it to the face fabric, and there, that is where a crosswise grain will hit. So what I will do here is I will line up, there we are, line up the lengthwise grain and crosswise grain. So I've lined up this, and we can just pin here and here. So we've lined up lengthwise grain, crosswise grain, so that when this shows on the body, it will be correct. Next, we're going to sew the organza to the face fabric. Our next step is to sew outside these lines. Don't sew on this side of the line, sew outside. See, these are the lines where the welt will fold. We want the stitches to land on the inside. So this is a single thread, and it really is just a tiny little stitch. I'm using a contrasting thread, obviously, for demonstration purposes, but if you sew it correctly, it really won't show. I'll show you this here, as you can see, like I said, outside that line. And no, I can't sew that fast, just so you all are, if you're wondering. Almost done. Secure the thread. And I'm just going to pin that there, pin that there. So when I turn this over, first off, I'll show you. This is what it should look like on the back. And now notice you don't have any real show through on the front. So those stitches just barely catch the fabric. You just want to hang the canvas by the organza. Now next, we're going to go over to the sewing machine and sew a machine stitch across the bottom. So all 4 sides of this quadrangle are anchored. So here,
Are you just using regular Gutermann?
just going to sew, excuse me, on,
Is it just regular Gutermann for the machine stitching here?
yeah, nothing fancy there. That line. Standard stitch. Just want to anchor it down like so. And there we have it. So that is what we just sewed. So now we take this back to the work table and we're going to pin the ends. Now this is where the letters come in. I've remarked the letters on this one. So we're going to match point A to point A and we're going to sew from A to B. What that looks like. Put the pin at A, fold right sides together, and bring the pin out on point A. So we have an in on point A, out on point A. We pin, then we pin based from A to B. So we just want to make sure that those 2 lines are pinned to each other. Now I will go over to the machine. I'm going to start at A, back tack, and sew down to B and back tack, and I'll bring it back and show you the result. As you can see here, started at A, stitch down to B and back tack. So from here, we want point C with point C. Match these 2, make sure they're nice and smooth. So point C with point C, point C, and then we pin based between C and D. And again, start the stitching at C, back tack, sew down to D and back tack. So I will bring back the results. So here we have sewn from C to D. Now, I'm going to trim the seam allowances to 1/4 of an inch, and then just take that off to get rid of it. 1/4 of an inch. Now here, make a clip 90 degrees to the stitching line right at the end. And we'll do the same thing. A to B, trim the seam allowance to 1/4 of an inch, And then get rid of the rest of this. That's a little oopsie right there. That's not going to kill you. Here. So to give you an idea, a little preview of where this is going. See, that is how the seams will go on the back. Next, pressing. First, so any questions before we press? No questions? Okay, pressing. We press the seams as sewn. And then on the point presser, I'm going to open up the seams. Okay, now something to see here. So you have these two 90-degree cut edges. You're going to overlap the two fabrics. And by overlapping them, later on we'll reduce the bulk, but that's just going to make your life easier. So then here, same thing. You want to press the seam open. And these two overlap as well. Now let me give you a good view of this. Okay. See how, there we are. See how this seam allowance goes that way and this one goes over that way. We're going to reduce the bulk later, but I just wanted to show you that up close. Next, we turn everything right side out. So I've turned everything right side out. So now we want that to sit under there and this to sit over. And same here, we want that seam allowance to go that way and that to sit over. And now, this is face down, we are going to press and there we are. Finally, to close the welt, where is it? There we are. There's your machine stitch that we sewed earlier. I'm going to sew through all the layers on that stitch again, and then I will meet you back at the work table. So here we are. You can see there's the machine stitching. And you can see we've sewn through all the layers. Now you can get rid of the basting. It has served its purpose. And we're done. So here is our welt. The next stop is going to be top stitching. If you choose to use top stitching, which I'm choosing to do, this is the time to do it. So as you can see here, I have chosen ribbon floss in a chain stitch for the collar and the cuff latches. So it stands. I would choose the same ribbon floss for the two pocket welts. Next, we're going to prepare the pocket welt to add to the pocket bag. Before we add the welt to the pocket, we need to trim this seam allowance down to 3/8 of an inch. Easy to do. 3/8 of an inch is going to come in handy. There we have the two welts. Next, the pockets. So any questions before we start putting the welts to the pockets? Okay. Here is the pocket bag with the welt attached. This is face side up, and the welt, as you can see, is sewn to the pocket, face side up. So now let me talk about what happens here and how we get there. This is the pocket bag, face side up. And you can see I pressed a crease. And really how you do that is you just line all the edges up, press that crease, open it up face side up. So from here, this is the welt, cut edge stitching line. We will line up the cut edge and center it on the pocket. So again, cut edge is on the crease and pin it down in a couple of places. This is where I like to check myself before I go any further to make sure that I have one for each side. Just want to look and make sure that this one faces this way and this one faces this way. I get dyslexic, so I have to check these things. So we will take this over to the sewing machine and sew the welt to the pocket. I'll meet you at the machine. So here is the stitching. What we want to do with the needle is we want to lower the needle and see how the needle bumps up against the edge of the welt right on that stitching line. That is what you're looking for. Because to start this, we're going to start with an extremely short stitch, a 0.5. And we want the beginning and the end of the stitching to be right at the edge of the welt, no further out. Now, stitch about 3/8 of an inch. Then lengthen the stitch to 2.5, just the standard default length. So again, right on that stitching till about 3/4 of an inch from the end. And then again, I want you to watch this. Shorten that stitch to 0.5. So you're going to sew till the first time that needle falls off the edge. It's better to be a little too short here rather than a little too long, because if it's a little too long, when you install the pocket, you're going to have a gap at each end. So there. You can see. And now we will go back to the work table. We have one final step before we install these pockets into the jacket. You can see here, there's the stitching line. We want to, now you don't cut through the pocket bag, but you want to cut the steep angle here and another steep angle here. Now there is about a 1/16 of an inch or about 1.5 millimeters between the short stitches and the edge of the fabric. So I'm going to pull out here a little bit because what you're creating, if you look at the shape of that seam allowance, you know, the stitching line from here down here and up, this cut edge is going to be your stitching guide in the next step when we install these into the coat. So what we've done here, we have prepared the pocket welts and the pocket bags. In our next lesson, we're going to install the pockets into the coat. So, questions?
I had one, when you place the flap on the pocket, I didn't see any markings, so you were just kind of centering it on the crease?
You just do it by eye.
Okay.
Because see, think about it for a moment. It's going to be inside the garment. So if it's not dead center, only the people with X-ray vision will get to see that.
Is it the stitching line that's centered on the crease, or it looked like the edge of the welt was on?
Length of the stitching line, you know, where the two, you know, where it starts to stitch and then stop. That is centered midway between, you know, each cut edge.
I have a question.
But one moment. And so, you know, the cut edge of the seam allowance is on the fold of the pocket. But at the, you know, the pocket itself, if you're like a little bit one way or the other, it's not going to kill you. The pocket will be successful both ways. Did that answer your question, Julie?
Yes, but as I'm kind of an idealist mathematically sometimes. So ideally, I'd want to get that sewing line on the pocket fold so that if I want my pockets to be perfectly symmetric.
You don't want the sewing line on the pocket fold. You want the cut edge of the seam allowance on the fold of the pocket. So
Okay.
the stitch line is going to be the 3/8 of an inch away from that fold.
Because the seam allowance is going to push the fold in the next step. Okay, got it.
Yes.
Thank
Okay,
you.
so now, Christy, question.
Yeah, I don't, it keeps talking about the pocket, the bag.
Yeah.
I don't see how that's a bag at all yet.
Well, see,
don't-
it's going to, you know, you have it, it kind of looks like this. It's going to
Uh-huh.
fold up like this, and you're going to sew around it, and that's going to create the pocket bag.
Where does the human hand go in?
It goes in where the welt is. See, the welt sets in the center of the whole thing, but the two pieces of it fold down, and when you sew it around, then that creates the pocket bag itself.
So a person lifts up the welt and slides their hand in? No.
Flip your hand down.
There will be a hole in the pocket bag, right?
Let me go get one of the coats, and it'll make more sense.
Okay, thank you.
This is like a Japanese sewing pattern, the way he did the welt. It's so cool.
So here we are. That's how you get.
Oh, that's how
And
you
so
get
the
in.
pocket bag comes around like this, but there's two of them. And so, you know, the fold is right up in here. So both, you know, after you've sewn this opening into the garments, then you sew around to join the two halves of that bag together. You know,
Got it.
because see, normally when you see this, the kind of the customary thing is to cut two different pocket bags. But why would you do that?
Okay.
It's much better to cut it all in one.
Yeah, I got it. I thought you lifted up the flap of the welt and slid your hand down under that.
That's
No.
Flap is when the edge faces down. Welt is when the edge faces up. That's kind of how I think.
Okay,
Okay.
got
so
it.
I have another question. So this envelopey Japanese style welt is really cool. When I've done welts in the past, I just, sewed two parallelograms together. So what's and maybe there's no answer for this, but is there like a structural advantage to doing it this way?
Yes, absolutely. All three edges are thin. You only have two thicknesses. You don't have four thicknesses, because if you're sewing, whether you have a fold on the top edge and you sew the seams at the edges, or you sew two parallelograms together, you have 4 layers of fabric. And so you've lost 2 layers of fabric. So it's much flatter. It lays against the fabric much more securely. It's just prettier, let me just bring this back over here, because
Yeah,
really, it doesn't really raise up.
very
It doesn't
nice.
get up from the fabric all that much. And it is because you only have the 2 layers of fabric aside from the interfacing, which you would have the interfacing one way or the other. So I just think it's prettier, the folded edges rather than the seams.
And Kenneth, can I just add that, because you showed this to me when I did the sit and sew with you a few years back, and I still have we used it for a squared off pocket, and it works equally well. The shape changes, but the same, A to A, B to B, C and D still works regardless of the ultimate shape of the pocket welt itself, because it's really cool.
Let me blow your mind here for a moment here, because it doesn't work with just things that have 2 corners. Let's just say you have, I'm not going to draw this straight edge, but let's say you have a pocket welt that's shaped like this. So what you could do is impose some seam lines on it. So the dotted lines are seam lines.
Hmm.
You with me?
Mhm.
Okay. And then, yeah, I once I kind of figured out that, you could do this with a variety of shapes, I did actually make a pocket for something. Can't remember what it was. I just remember making the pocket. So we're going to trace out. So we fold along that line and trace out this. Next, we're going to fold along that line. And trace out that. Are you with me? And then we fold along the top line, and I ran it a little tight, but you'll get the idea. And then the other side, you could just fold this in half and trace it for a mirror image. So you'll have 4 seams on the back of the pocket, and you're going to have folded edges all along the face of the pocket. Does that make sense? It's kind of like origami, but it's why not? Hey. So, other questions? I see someone's doggy. I love doggies. I really do. I wish I had, well, I had the perfect dog. And so actually, Sonia, you got to meet Daisy, didn't you? Yeah, she was the perfect dog. So I had the perfect dog. And so for me, it's like, I know people who have one child and this child is an angel and they think, oh, hey, I'll have another one. And then the next one is a devil. So I don't want to take that risk. So,
I have 4. I can send you one.
They also might, there's another dog. Oh, how cute. No, Andrew has Marvin, the blind cat. So we're good. So thankfully Marvin has settled down. I probably have told this story before, but when we first got Marvin, he was still a kitten, and he was very rambunctious, and he would audition for the Olympics every night. And Andrew got the idea, well, we'll close the bedroom door, and then he would fling himself against the bedroom door, and it sounded like a sack of concrete banging against the door. And so this went on for some weeks, and he was getting a little bit frayed at the edges because he wasn't getting any sleep. And one day he was just at his wit's end, and he said, I just wish he would just settle down at night like all my other cats did. All my other cats, just at night, they'd settle down and they'd sleep on the bed. And I said, honey, he's blind. He doesn't nighttime. He has no idea. He's a blind cat. We have to make allowances here. So yeah, so happily he has, oh, there's Mushi. Oh, look at that handsome face. Mushi
I
is
had to bring him in to show you.
He's a star dog there. He definitely has star quality, that one. Okay, so this is our lesson for this week. Questions, comments, requests, anything that you need from me or need me to answer, or
Kenneth,
yes, go ahead.
I just wondered, is there a limit to when you will do the 1 hour, individual lesson?
No, because I have a gal in the lace jacket class. She's an accountant, and she's right in the middle of tax season. So I said, no, so if you want to push it down the road a little bit, that's absolutely okay by me. Just as long as you get it. I want you to make sure you get it. So I'm not going to
Thank
stick.
you.
Yeah, because some people, I mean, we all have lives. I mean, like next week I've got a life. So, we all have to make allowances. And so that is one of the advantages of a format like this, is we can do that. So Sonia, you had a question. You have your hand
Yes,
up.
I noticed you showed us before on the jacket on the front where we're going to attach the welt pocket that you had the stay tape. So the stay tape also goes in the back, and the other side goes, where does it go? So if we're going to attach it, shouldn't we do it the whole jacket right away or
I like
not?
the stay tape. I like the stay tape on the neck edge. I like the stay tape down the center front, and I like it on the armhole. So you don't really have to put any stay tape on where the welt is going to set. If you want to, you could put a little fusible behind where the welt is going to set for next time. I tend to put a little fusible behind the welt. I just think it's good insurance. And so on the other pieces, and I'll kind of get there, but while we're talking about it, I like stay tape on one of the sides of the seam on the sleeve. If you stay tape the back raglan and stay tape the back neck edge, and you can stay tape the back side seams, then you'll have all of your seams that you need stayed. And that's just a fusible stay tape. Any kind of stay tape that you have will, or if you don't have stay tape, you could just cut like a little narrow strip of fusible tricot on the lengthwise grain. That works quite nicely, and it is flexible, so you can. Yeah, I'm gonna brag. When I was in China, the one good thing that came out of China, and it was only one good thing, was this particular stay tape. I had never seen it until China. And when I saw it, I was like, asked my co-professor, where do you get this? And she's like, well, she went on the Chinese internet, and she said, how much do you want? I'm like, I want 5 bolts of this. This is something I've never seen. And so it was like 5 bolts is like $20. I should have just bought a whole bunch, but if you can see it, here, it's like a straight grain taffeta, about 1/8 of an inch, sewn to a fusible bias. They also make one with the tape at the straight grain at the edge, and I know Sil Thread sells that one, but this has really changed my life when it comes to tailoring, because the stay tape is narrow enough, it'll go around armholes, and the fusible, sticks it in place until you're ready to sew, and then you can sew right through the stay tape. If I could get my hands on it, I would probably be selling it, or I would actually tell Anne where to get it so she could sell it. But it was just one of those one of those things when I was there that I saw all the kids using, and I said, how could I get some of that? And so I got, like I said, I should have bought, because see, when she was telling me how much it was in Chinese money, and I didn't have any idea. And it was basically, you know, when she delivered it, it was like $20. It's like, damn, I should just ordered a whole bunch of it, because, you know, anyway. But the fusible Trico, fusible stay tape works just nicely on that. Okay, so other questions? Okay then, so I guess I will turn off the recording. I'm gonna hang out for a few more minutes.